Greetings and welcome. My name is John Fanistil, Executive Director at VIA International. And on behalf of the entire team here at VIA International, I want to welcome you to the VIA Cafe and to this edition of VIA Voices, our weekly conversation with leaders from along and across the U.S.-Mexico border. We're glad you're with us. Thanks so much for joining us. And I'm especially excited about our conversation today, in which we'll be learning more about the recent Supreme Court decision having to do with the program of DACA, Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals. I do need to share with you that our invited guest for today, Lisbeth de la Cruz Santana, suffered a death in her family and was unable to be with us. And I'm so grateful that our guest today, Dulce Garcia, was available on short notice. Dulce, I'll introduce her more in just a minute, an extraordinary participant in the unfolding drama around DACA, a leader here in San Diego, acting executive director of Border Angels, and we're so grateful to her for joining us on short notice. And we wish our very best, of course, to Lisbeth Santana and her family. I do want to just explain a little bit about the program for today. This program is brought to you by VIA International and is supported by the friends of our organization. For those of you who would like to receive weekly invitations without having to register for each event, you can do so in one of two ways. You can become a sponsor of this series, a $100 gift, and we'll look forward to recognizing you and thanking you along with our other sponsors. Or if you'd like to just receive the invitation weekly, you can become what we call a champion. A champion is somebody who receives the weekly emails, participates as they're able in these weekly sessions, and then just spreads the word, passes their email invitation around to friends they think would be interested, likes our work on social media and spreads the word that way, and helps us to spread the word, champion the cause of lifting up voices from along and across the border. And I've asked the links to the sponsorship and the champions is found in the chat room. If you'd like to click through right now or later on in the program or at the end of the event, you can click through. And that way you'll receive invitations to our weekly program. I also want to encourage anyone who would like to as questions come to you, questions you'd like answered, feel free to use that chat room. You can write your questions there, and after 20 or 25 minutes of conversation with Dulce Garcia, we'll turn to those questions from the chat room and lift those up so you have a chance to dialogue in effect with her. And so now, with that said, I'm going to welcome to the platform Dulce Garcia. Dulce, a native, grew up here in San Diego, grew up in Barrio Logan, near our VIA International offices. I'm curious to know exactly where in Barrio Logan Dulce lived. But she has led a remarkable life and now has become one of the most prominent spokespersons for the program of Deferred Action for Childhood Arrival, under which she herself has legal status here in the United States. And Dulce, let me invite, as I welcome Dulce to the platform, let me invite everybody to will you join me in a round of applause, por favor, as we say thank you to Dulce and welcome her to the VIA Voices. Again, Dulce, thanks so much for joining us on short notice. Much appreciated.
Yeah, thank you for the invitation. Speaking about our border is always welcome, so thank you.
Very good. Well, thank you. I did want to I want to begin by asking you about this recent Supreme Court decision, a decision to prevent the Trump administration from bringing an end to the program of Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals. I'm curious to know where were you when you heard of this most recent decision, and what was your experience of learning that news?
Well, this time I was still in bed. We had been expecting this decision for a while, and every possible date where we could get an opinion, and we were, thinking that it was going to be likely a negative opinion. We would wake up, and the news would be heard in the East Coast first. So here in San Diego time, every time that we thought that there was going to be an opinion date, it was an early date for me, so I would have to put my alarm earlier. And then it just got exhausting every single time, thinking this is the date they're going to tell me DACA was unlawful or you can't have DACA anymore. And knowing this president, it's going to be from day one, he's going to try to either put us in a detention center to deport us or attack certain activists. And I thought, sure enough, I'm probably on the top of that list. So it just got so tiring that on the day when it was actually announced, I didn't even believe it when they said there's a decision out. It wasn't like the other times where I jumped out of bed as soon as I heard the alarm. This time I snoozed it and didn't want to know about it until someone said the decision's out, we won, and I couldn't believe it. So I actually had to see for myself, and I had to go to the Supreme Court website to find out if it was a fake news or if we had won. But it's been a long road. It's been tiring some. So.
And were you surprised by the either the outcome of the decision in terms of the vote or the content of the decision in terms of exactly how they ruled? Tell us a little bit more about your assessment of this particular action by the court.
Yeah, I think there's no doubt that our stories played a big part in this. And even after November 12th, I was lucky enough to be there and listen to the arguments, and I could tell some of the justices were really fighting to find ways to help us. And then there were the other ones that were looking for ways to really convince their colleagues to go their way and negate and terminate DACA. So that was the worry that we had, that it wasn't clear who had won back in November after the oral arguments. And then so as DACA recipients, we filed documents after the argument, and in those documents we explained the impact that the program has had on the fight against COVID-19, and how 30,000 DACA recipients, including doctors and nurses, EMTs, and a ton of other workers were and are still on the front lines combating this disease, this virus. And so we did work even after the oral argument. So I really do think that our stories made that impact. I think that the Chief Justice looked for a way to keep us here without declaring whether DACA was constitutional or not. And some folks say, well, you won on a technicality, but technicality or not, I get to stay here.
And did you have a sense while you were in the court hearing the arguments, did you have a sense that Gorsuch was also maybe a swingish vote on this?
I thought he was a no. I thought for sure he was a no. And, this president put him there, and I thought he has this responsibility to the president. Although as a lawyer, what I would hear growing up is that, this is a part of the check and balance system, and I have to believe that the justices would do what is right. And later, as an adult in law school, I learned, well, it's not really exactly black and white. There's a lot of gray area that happens in our legal system, including when justices really do want to write an opinion your way and look for a way to do so. I think this is one of those. That it didn't say DACA is constitutional, but it did say the way the president rescinded DACA was unlawful. And if he wants to take DACA away, he has to go back to the drawing board and do so in a way that is according to the APA. And so he has to follow procedures. So it sounds like I think that's all because of our stories. I think we made an impact.
Yeah. Well, and tell us a little bit, if you're willing, about your story. I know that you are a DACA recipient yourself. And I've just read, this is the first time we've had a chance to chat, but I've read your bio and seen other interviews with you. Tell us a little bit about yourself. And I am curious to know, where in Barrio Logan did you grow up? We have a lot of people on this program today are from Barrio Logan.
Yeah, so we came in 1987. We weren't destined for San Diego. We wanted to go to LA. But so those of us that are in this call that are from San Diego, we know that there's a double deportation force here at the border, right? We don't only have ICE, but we have Border Patrol in our communities. And that was certainly the case then. We had heard that they were riding on the trains, and, they had set up checkpoints. So we didn't run the risk, and we stayed here in San Diego. And it was meant to be temporarily, but here we are after 30 something years still here in San Diego. So when we first arrived, it was around 30th and Imperial, and then we moved to closer to 28th in Imperial. I did go to Logan Heights and Memorial, and then eventually San Diego High School. That was the track then.
Yeah.
And then when I was in high school, all of this time growing up, I didn't realize that, what it actually meant to be undocumented. And so in San Diego High, I went to talk to my counselor, thinking I was going to be going on to one of the UC universities. And my counselor was like, nope, you're an illegal immigrant. You're not going to go anywhere. You're not even going to go across the street to City College, he said.
Wow.
And this was in 2001. California Dream Act had just passed, and so a lot of staff didn't know what opportunities were out there for undocumented students. The word dreamer hadn't been coined yet, and so it was a difficult time then being a student and being undocumented. Not that it isn't today, but there was so much lack of information there that I can't even imagine how many people were hurt by it. But I'm a little stubborn, so I, like my mom, I did go to City College, were paid through as a foreigner. They were classifying me as a foreigner, even though this is where I grew up, and I couldn't believe that I was paying tuition as if I was not from here, because I saw myself, as an American and from Logan Heights. That's all I knew. And then I eventually did transfer to UC San Diego, and then I went to law school at Cleveland, and again, all without financial aid and paying my way through having a full-time job in a law office, and then combined with a lot of side jobs.
Yeah, and it was during that period, was it, that the concept that you mentioned that early on in your life there wasn't this identity of dreamer or this notion of when did the Dream Act first come into view? I know it was passed under the Obama administration, but when did it first come into view, and when did you first begin to maybe even have that language to describe yourself as a dreamer, or you and your peers? Tell us a little bit about how that identity and that movement came about.
Yeah, a lot of work had already started. Again, winning the California Dream Act was huge, where it allowed students here in California, at least, to be able to afford tuition. Was a big win. So the organizing had already started, and I'm glad you asked that question, because a lot of people think, oh, DACA, that's Obama's program, but in reality, that was our program. A lot of undocumented students were on the street, young folk risking not ever being able to enroll in school, and being deported, and their livelihoods just being taken away because they were literally chaining themselves to congressional offices. They were in the streets blocking ICE vans from deporting people. So this movement wasn't a movement for DACA. It was a movement for comprehensive immigration reform. It was a movement for more humane immigration policies. DACA ended up being a compromise of that, and unfortunately, after 2012, it kind of did placate the movement a little. We did become a little satisfied with what we had been given, to a point where the work was still getting done, but it wasn't to what it is today, where we're back on the streets protesting. And in 2012, when Obama announced the program, because the Dream Act had failed, the comprehensive immigration reform had failed, and so there was a push for him to do it by way of executive order, because we still believe till today that is something that is within the power of the executive to do so. I remember one of the most memorable things about what he was saying was that the acknowledgement that we were here, which is huge, because for a bigger part of my life at that point, I still was in what we call the shadows. I still hadn't announced to the world that I'm undocumented. And I think that was the biggest thing for me, the acknowledgement, the recognition, knowing that we were here. At that time, I was in law school, and I couldn't tell anyone that I was undocumented, because I was afraid that they were going to turn me in. and then I wasn't going to graduate. So I was still in what we call the shadows. And so nobody knew that I was undocumented in law school, and that there weren't many brown folks there to begin with. So it was really powerful to hear those statements of recognition. When I heard the rescission from Jeff Sessions, oh my goodness, that was totally the opposite.
Yeah.
Couldn't believe it.
Yeah, an attempt to lift back up the veil to create those shadows again. Yeah.
Yeah, and not only that, like the way that Jeff Sessions was saying that we had taken advantage of the program by participating in the Social Security system. And I'm like, participating in the Social Security system, like we paid millions of dollars into the Social Security system. I can never ever get a single dollar out from it because only legal permanent residents and U.S. citizens can benefit from that program. So something I tell senior citizens is, especially if they're in retirement, it's like, you're welcome. You're welcome because we're feeding onto this program that we can never get a single dollar out from. And so I was cringing. And that was just one example of the many things that Jeff Sessions was saying.
Yes.
And so...
well, and I find it also fascinating that, during this period, as you said, that DREAM movement and the movement for early childhood arrivals emerged as part of a larger, concern for immigrant rights. And yet through DACA and through this particular legislation, it kind of became a very easily identifiable population. I guess the round numbers I hear are usually 800,000. Is that still kind of the ballpark number? People. Yeah, the White House number estimates 600,000 by their numbers. Okay.
More.
But of course, those populations are connected directly, family, friend, peers, parents often, and so forth, to these other populations of undocumented immigrants. And so, how do you see the future of both the movement of Dreamers and the protection of DACA, but also in that larger context of the struggle for a more comprehensive or more expansive, maybe, immigration rights or immigration legislation agenda?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, one thing the president did get right was in one of the many tweets when he's attacking us, and he says they're not kids anymore. And the reality is, no, a lot of us are already grown up and are in a position of power to demand what we deserve. And this is the time that we feel we have picked up momentum to continue the fight where we were over 20 years ago and ask for comprehensive immigration reform, because that's what we have been wanting for a long time now. And I don't think it's time to settle anymore for a DACA fix as it has been discussed in Congress. Unfortunately, with this Congress and with this president, we're not going to get that. This president continues to attack our communities and is using us as political bargaining chips and says, well, in exchange for DACA, we're going to bring in the wall. We're going to cut lawful migration in half. We're going to undo the visa lottery. He calls chain migration what we call family reunification, and which is precisely the system that he used to bring in his in-laws. So I always say that I think it's the in-laws that ruined it for the rest of America. But, these are policies that, as an undocumented person, as you mentioned, we have our families. When I crossed the border, I was crossing it with holding in one hand my older brother and another one my mom. So, and that's all we had. It was just each other, our families. Sometimes we had to live in my dad's van, homeless, for long periods of time. It wasn't easy, as many undocumented people go through it when they first arrive here in the U.S. It was really hard. So how can we turn our backs to our own family members by protecting only DACA recipients?
Right.
And my older brother, who I just mentioned, he was 8 years old when he crossed with me, and he was left out of the DACA program because one of the requirements was he had to be under the age of 31 to apply for it, and at that time he had turned 31 by a few months. Yeah. And so, he has seen the transformation that DACA has had in my life in the last couple of years, but he hasn't been able to take advantage of a work permit or being lawfully here. And so I see that pain that has caused the lack of having a piece of paper causes my parents and even my older brother. And so that's the reason, our families are the reasons why we have to fight for more this time. and make sure.
Could I ask, do you by chance have any younger siblings? Do you have any younger siblings? And were any of them born here in the United States?
Yeah, I have my little brother. He's 27. He was born here in the U.S. And that's another example of why I always have in mind my parents, is because he's completely dependent on my parents. He's autism doesn't allow for his independence. So, if we were to talk about deporting my dad, for example, who are at Chicano Park all the time.
Yeah.
If you were to deport my dad, what happens to my little brother who takes care of him? He's a U.S. citizen, and he would have to self-deport to go with my parents.
Yeah, there are several people on the call here today from Tijuana, including some who were deported and some deported parents, who in these mixed status families, as they're called, right? These parents face anguishing choices. If they are deported or a member of the family is deported, what do you do with the children? Some may be U.S. citizens, but some may not. Some may have status, some protection under DACA, others may not. These kinds of extended family, the impacts are so complicated in every case. Yeah. And I've always wondered, this idea that the Dreamers and the DACA, I do feel it's kind of like a bargaining chip, right, in the immigration reform struggle. I think that's certainly how the Trump administration has played it. Whatever their particular plans, it seems to me they were ready to, if we can get rid of, or at least void DACA, then that will give us more leverage, in our, arguments with the Democrats on other issues related to immigration. Is that your sense that it's kind of people are playing angles with the politics of this in Washington?
That's exactly right. When I was applying for DACA, I would hear people say, because I had this concern, right? Like, I'm giving all of my information to the government, the federal government that I've been hiding from for decades. And here I am turning myself in and getting fingerprinted and going through all this process. But what if they turn me over to ICE to deport me? And I kept hearing from different people, experts, saying it would be political suicide. It would be political suicide to attack the DACA program because so many people support these young folks. And the new, more recent data shows over 85% of Americans support DACA recipients, including Trump supporters. Over the overwhelming majority of Trump supporters support the DACA program. So it's no doubt that they're using it precisely for that reason. They know we're popular, and he wants to come out the hero and say, it was the Republicans that offered protection for DACA. It was the Republicans that got it done. And so he wants this victory. And at the same time, I still do think, though, that it's also very much racist. This president knows that the DACA program is used by a majority of brown folks, right? Majority are from Mexico and Central America. There are DACA recipients from all over the world. But he knows they're not white kids from Europe. And so I think there's also the white supremacy issue there involved very much so. And in combination with the political aspect of it, this president ran with an anti-immigrant agenda in 2016. And so he has to appeal to his voters, and this is a good way to do it for him.
Yeah, and it does, as you mentioned, this new environment in which we're all living with COVID, has given a pretext for the Trump administration to crack down, for instance, on asylum or other, immigrant visas. And so this larger agenda, it is a very persistent and pernicious agenda that they've been pursuing for so long. But you find, we were chatting last week with Pedro Rios about the Black Lives Movement matter and immigrant rights, and you see the COVID environment and the Black Lives Movement matter kind of, you find your peers in the Dreamer networks kind of energized by this time, and are you seeing new opportunities or new passions emerging in the movement at the present time?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's a combination of all those things, the awakening that's happening, along with this recent victory that gives us a little bit more peace of mind to do the work that we're doing. With COVID-19, our communities have been especially hit. Black and brown folks are especially impacted by what we're seeing. And at the same time, we know we have so much power and so much resiliency, and we've been noticing that, in telling our stories again in a way that empowers other folks has been really crucial as well. Right now, we're going through a world pandemic, and we know that migration is not just happening here in the southern border; it's global, and this virus is affecting everyone in the world too. So, I think this is the time where we do feel re-energized. This win has given us, and what's in combination with the Black Lives Matter movement and everything that's happening around us, definitely has given us this energy to push for more. And that's why we're not settling anymore for just a quick DACA fix. And I was in Congress the last 2 years, and every time we would go there would be some politicians that would be talking about quick DACA fix, and again, bringing in more destruction to our border, like the wall. And they would ask us whether we would take in that wall in exchange for DACA. And we're like, no, why would we bring in more death to our border in exchange for the protection of just a few people? Because DACA left so many folks out to begin with. And so, but that's what the discussion was in DC, and that's why we needed to have this win, because that's what we would be talking about right now had we lost, and this president would have been pushing for. And so I think this victory definitely re-energizes us in the movement. Yeah.
Well, great. I want to encourage any of our participants who want to ask questions, again, to jot them in the chat room. I see a couple already, but let's fill up the chat room with other questions that you may have. But while they're doing that, Dulce, what would you tell us a little? I know you own your own office, your law office, but you're also now working as acting executive director of Border Angels. Would you share a little bit about your work in that regard? How's that going?
Yeah, it's really rewarding. Also very heartbreaking. I mean, I say it with a smile, but there's such a big need here in our border, and it's a lot of the suffering a direct result of what is coming from DC, from this president. The continued attack on our immigrant community, specifically our asylum seekers. One of our programs that just started this year is our immigration bond fund program. Familias Reunidas we were able to post a bond, the very first one in January 7. And then last week, we just posted our 33rd bond. Over 24 of them have been during this world pandemic. And so we have been able to do so thanks to all of our donors. We don't receive any government grants. So Border Angels is 100% funded by individuals, people that donate anywhere from $5, $20, $100 to get somebody out. And also with collaboration with other organizations like the National Bail Fund Network, for example, Freedom for Immigrants. Because we are seeing a pattern of ICE asking for well over $15,000, $20,000 bonds for people that have no criminal history, just asking for an opportunity to have their day in court and have their asylum claim listened to. And so we have that program. At the same time, we have our shelter assistance program, where we're assisting right now 12 shelters, 10 in Tijuana and 2 in Mexicali. And again, these shelters are housing over 15,000 asylum seekers, and they're not receiving help from the government either. They depend as well on donations. And with COVID-19 closing the borders, a lot of the folks that would go here on the U.S. side are no longer going to these shelters to offer support. So this assistance has become critical. Yeah. And then we have, of course, our water drop program that is also directly related to these issues. We're still seeing very much people are attempting to cross through the mountains and the deserts. Again, another reason why we wholeheartedly oppose to having a wall here. So it's been very difficult, especially here in San Diego, to be on ground zero for the policies that are very much anti-immigrant, very much based on white supremacy that are coming from this president.
Yeah, well, thank you, and more power to you for that work. And we share so much our VIA International work, and many of our members, our network of friends, are very involved in precisely these same issues. So it's such a pleasure to get to chat with you and to hear more about your work. And again, thanks so much for joining us. I do want to open it up now. I'm going to ask my colleagues to just lift up any questions that may come out of the chat room. And then we'll see, we'll continue the conversation for a little bit, and we'll close by 12:50 is our marker. But what questions are there to lift up out of the chat room, friends?
I have here a question, is a comment more than anything. Assuming that Trump loses his elections, what we all hope he does, the issue of DACA termination debt for the rest of this administration? This is coming from Jim Gerber.
Yes, if this president loses, then there's a chance. But we also have to turn around the composition of the Senate. Right now, there is a Dream and Promise Act that has already passed in the House because that is controlled by Democrats. So there's already a quote-unquote DACA fix that would actually protect more than just DACA recipients. And that's what we have been pushing for years now. And it passed on the House, but it's stuck in the Senate because Mitch McConnell won't put it to a vote. We think that if it were to be put on the floor for a vote, it would win. But the Senate right now is controlled by Republicans, so we also have to change that as well. I think that's how we're going to get comprehensive immigration reform. But if we don't get rid of the president, there's definitely no chance.
Just to clarify too, it seems that the Trump administration doesn't really get another bite at this apple before the election. Is that right, do you think? Or is there a...
No. So the only thing that, the only instruction that was given to the administration was to try again in a way that is lawful, right? And he can do so. And he can do so immediately. And that doesn't mean that whatever he releases is going to be lawful, and so that's going to also be tied in litigation, right? We think that if he had actually had a good way to rescind the program, he would have done so from the very beginning, right? And we're seeing it with the census case again, where he's being told to try again, and he's not doing so. So the likelihood is that he won't have a way to rescind the DACA program that is lawful and compliant with the APA at this point, but he can try. And this president, we have seen him do all kinds of crazy things before, unlawful things, even with asylum. Like I am turning gray hair already with all the things that this president is attempting that is unlawful. So whether it's lawful or not, I still think he's going to try, because he's going to try to appeal to his anti-immigrant base.
Yeah, thank you. What other questions are there?
Another question here. Are Dreamers eligible to become U.S. citizens? I don't understand why DACA children who have been here for decades cannot become citizens.
Yes, thank you for that question. DACA is so limited. I get only a work permit, and we've been fighting for a path to citizenship, meaning I want to become a legal permanent resident one day. One day, I want to eventually apply to become a U.S. citizen, to vote, to even serve on a jury. I know a lot of people avoid jury duty, but I'm looking forward to it as a citizen, to be able to be on that box and play my part as a citizen and be recognized as a U.S. citizen. But I can't even become a legal permanent resident in the first place. DACA is only a work permit. It stands for Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals, which means all it does is just defers deportation for now, because I still have to comply with every single requirement to keep it, meaning like I can't go out and commit a felony because then they might take it away. I can't leave the country because then they won't let me back in. So it's so restrictive. All it does, DACA, really what it is I pay $495 for the privilege to receive back a work permit that allows me then to contribute to the economy, but not really benefit from all the good things that U.S. citizens benefit from. And that's it. I'm a lawyer, so damn it, I am not lazy at all. I know how to fill out forms, but there is no form for me to fill out. There is just no way for me to become a legal permanent resident. And people say, well, what if you just marry a U.S. citizen? I still can't, because I came here unlawfully and I don't have a way to become a legal permanent resident unless the law changes. And like me, there's 11 million people in this country. It's not for lack of wanting. If there had been a line that my family could have lined up, I think we would have been on the front of it by now after 30 years. So thank you so much for the question, but there is just no way for me to become a legal permanent resident.
Thank you. Other questions?
We have another question. What can U.S. citizens do to support comprehensive immigration reform?
Oh my goodness, yes, thank you. Two things. One, get out the vote and the census. Make sure everybody's counted. Even undocumented people, we count. And so it's super important to bringing in not only the resources that we need in our communities, but it also has to do with representation and having the proper representation in our communities. And the vote, obviously, as we discussed, we need to get rid of this president in Congress if we really want to have more humane policies in place.
Thank you. Another question was asked, is there any way we can get involved with your work directly? I'm guessing that might refer to Border Angels or your legal advocacy. What are some immediate ways or practical ways, direct ways that somebody could get involved?
Yes, our email is admin@borderangels.org, and I'll type it in here on the chat. admin@borderangels.org. And it could just be something as simple as getting information out for us, retweeting or resending out the information that we provide to the community, get the word out on some of our actions.
Thank you. Great contact. Yeah, thank you. Other questions? I did, Robert, I see you typed in a question from Tijuana. Do you want to lift that up for Dulce?
Sure, thank you, John. Dulce, are there any plans out there within the Dreamer movement as a new movement or as a part of the Dreamer movement to repatriate or to allow Dreamers that have been removed for minor technicalities with no criminal record to have the opportunity to return to the United States? Also, what are your feelings on a Fix 96 movement that would, of course, create an immigration reform and allow Dreamers as yourself the opportunity of legal status, but also be able to repatriate those that have been deported that have U.S. citizen families, in particular U.S. citizen children that have to grow up without the love and the care of one or two of the parents or both of the parents?
Yeah, thanks for bringing this question, Robert. It's important that people know that this administration has been deporting Dreamers in the first place. A lot of people don't think that they're unaware that this has been happening. But this president has deported Dreamers, and not only that, but we've seen some really sad cases where DACA recipients have accidentally left the U.S. even with their valid DACA here on the border, and not only here on our border with Tijuana, but also in Texas, accidentally left the border outside of the U.S., tried to explain the situation to the Border Patrol, and then they weren't allowed in, and then they're sitting still in a prison cell, while their case is fought. And this has been happening since this administration started. It used to be the case that with the prior administration, during the Obama administration, you can try to explain to Border Patrol and they could exercise their discretion to allow you back in, and that hasn't happened. And with those folks that have either self-deported or have been deported, the cases are being led individually. Unfortunately, there isn't a big movement because we've been focusing efforts on keeping all DACA recipients here and fighting and defending DACA as a program, as a whole. But if anyone knows now with this win of any violations by USCIS and USCIS turning over to ICE information about a DACA recipient, please let me know, because we're going to be fighting these cases. We're going to be fighting them in court, but they're on a case by case unless we get a big number of cases that allow us to then do a class action. At this point, we're fighting them on a case by case. But in order to return someone, it's nearly impossible at this point. Again, we have to get rid of this president. And something that anyone can do right now, any citizen, is you can pressure your congressional and Senate, mainly Senate representatives, to put the DREAM Act on the floor.
Great.
Oh, and as far as I'm sorry, Robert, you
wait.
also asked about the Fix 96.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Absolutely. Those laws are, again, as a result of really hateful rhetoric that was coming. Back in the day, as I was a child, I was listening to all kinds of hurtful terms being used to describe me and my family, like welfare child, and my dad was described as a criminal. Very similar to what we're seeing Trump do. This is coming from Pitt Wilson here and its movement of hate in California with Prop 187, and that made its way onto DC. That those hateful terms and turned into law and criminalized our community. So that is something that needs to get done immediately. If we're going to be talking about comprehensive immigration reform, we have to undo the laws of the 90s that allow for our community to be punished just for crossing the border, and with a number of other things that created, out of the 11 million, those laws in 96, the IRA created 5 million of them, and I'm one of those. And so half of the so-called unlawful immigration occurred precisely because of those policies. So we definitely have to go back to the drawing board and come up with something that is not only more humane, but that doesn't create more undocumented people. It had the unintended effect of creating more undocumented folks.
Thank you for that. Thank you. Well, and thank you. I want to say thank you again to everyone for participating. And just as a reminder, this is part of our effort to connect virtually with our audience and friends and supporters, as well as new friends, people who want to connect across borders. And so we've launched the Via Cafe. I just want to share that website with you. And Via Cafe is kind of designed as an online meeting portal where you can learn more about various programs that are being offered here at Via International, including our own efforts to raise voices from along and across the border. Spanish language classes. I did want to just bring to everyone's attention that Dan Watman, our friend Dan Watman, is starting a conversational Spanish, advanced conversation, starting next Monday, July 6th. If you'd like to, si quieren hablar español or mejorar tu español, there's a great opportunity with Dan. Our own work supporting shelters in Tijuana, much like work being done by Border Angels and other organizations. And then the Beyond Borders Coffee, where you can order coffee from Mexico and Guatemala, supporting women-led coffee collaborative. So please do check out viacafe.org. And once more, this Via Voices series, I want to share with you the agenda for next week. I'm very pleased to announce that next week we'll be interviewing our own friend Robert Vivar, de aquí de allá. And I'm also pleased to announce that starting next week, Robert will be joining us as the host of our team at Via International. He'll be joining our team as host of the Via Cafe. And so I hope you'll join us next Wednesday, and Robert will get to tell us a little bit more about himself and his journey. But we'll also get to share more with you about the role that we're developing for Robert to serve as our online host of the Via Cafe. And lastly, let me just reiterate that if you'd like to receive the weekly emails for this Via Voices programming, please do sign up with one of those links if you'd like to sponsor with a financial gift, or if you'd like to just become a champion and receive the weekly emails and help us spread the word. Those links are there in your chat room again. Thanks so much, Angela, for posting those. Dulce, before we sign off, I guess I just want to ask one final question. Great thanks for joining us. We've been chatting with different people and learning about all different ways of thinking about the kind of work that so many people are doing, like yourself. And we've heard different ways that people talk about it. Some people think about themselves as defenders of human rights and others as community organizers. And I know you yourself, of course, are an immigration attorney. Is there a particular, if somebody asks what you do or how you think of your work, is there a particular title or label or name that you'd like to claim for yourself? If somebody asks you in an elevator, what you're working on, how do you describe yourself?
That's funny. I've been described as an activist, but I've never really used it myself. As an advocate, I would say, with the work that I do, I would say as an advocate, being a lawyer, but also being the lead for a nonprofit at this point. And I mean, I've led protests on the streets, and I've done lobbying in Congress. So I'm not sure what term there is for me, but I mean, I'm willing to get changed to a congressional desk if necessary and get arrested if that's what needs to get done. And I had never used the term activist to describe myself until at one rally somebody used it to describe me, and I ran with that too.
Oh, good, and we'll go with abogada and advocate both. And so we so appreciate your work, and more power to you. Wish you very, very best, and so again appreciate your willingness to engage with our group of friends here in dialogue today. We look forward to staying in touch, and I hope to meet you someday, maybe after the COVID virus is over, we can share a cup of coffee together. So, but thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you, everyone.
Yeah, very good. Let's give a round of applause, please, to Dulce, and we'll see you next week, same time, same channel. Thanks again, everybody, for participating, and you know where to find us at viacafe.org. Thanks so much. Bye-bye.